Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a show that rumbles along to the big stories locally, provincially, nationally, internationally, and rumbling along across town is my co-host with the most. I'm Robin Adair, and it's John Jurisic on the other microphone. And John, so much going on as usual, and no shortage of viewer mail over the last couple of weeks.
No shortage of viewer mail. Woo! People are so fired up about everything, appears, we have to say, especially on vaccinations. And guess what? Go get one. If that's not going to fire up a few people, go get one. Get vaccinated. We've also had a ton of feedback on the comparison between Canadian and U.S. politics. I sure hope so. Supporters of the truckers' freedom movement point out that their convoys have been peaceful and haven't broken any laws. Okay, good stuff. We don't disagree. We just think that waving flags and yelling about freedom being taken away, stopping downtowns from operating, all that looks very much like a Trump rally. So if you really want change, present some reasonable goals. Elect a new government. Do it the way that we've always done it. Become active in the process of governance in Canada. It's what democracy is supposed to be all about in Canada.
Absolutely, John. And we have had, as I've mentioned, some pretty colorful comments on Facebook and Twitter. Garl writes, that's kind of an interesting name, eh? Garl, I bet you it's not his real name. Anyway, Canada is not a functional nation. With the current government, it is sinking fast.
Such extremes, really. So Margaret, who's not a fan when it comes to us defending vaccinations, she writes, these two, that being you and I, need to stay hiding in their basements. We're not in our basements. Nonetheless, I suppose it might look that way. And keep drinking the Kool-Aid. They are a complete joke. Well, we do have a sense of humor, Margaret. Why else would we post your note? Why else would we treat it with such brevity? Also, Robert chimes in. Liberals are communists the last 3 years. Prove it. Well, you can see the anti-mandate forces have gathered on the Rumble Room digital media universe. But Robin, we did get a note that balances the good ship Rumble Room.
You bet, Johnny. We did get a note that we thought was a little bit more, I guess, maybe sympathetic to our point of view. And Lyle writes, a lot of wingnuts commenting. It's often the nut jobs who think their opinion is more important than everyone else's. I think Rebel News is missing you. And again, we always enjoy hearing from both our supporters and detractors. It's part of the whole idea of this show is dialogue, open communications to talk about the issues. And we believe that's part of democracy. So fire away. And let's now shift on, Johnny, and talk for a few minutes about consultants.
Boy, we could talk for hundreds of shows about consultancy, Robin. You and I have been consultants for many years with many companies on a whole bunch of various projects. I happen to love the job. Sometimes businesses need good advice. Same goes for government. They need to be told the straight goods. We certainly deliver it. And often those answers reside in who's delivering the goods, who's the team, who's already on your payroll. And that question applies to public and private sector organizations. How good, for example, is your minister? How good is the civil service in delivering what you want and need to be delivered?
There's always been consultancy work. Every political party in the country utilizes these types of services. However, it's a big debate at the moment because, of course, taxes are always going up and people are resentful about paying so much to the provincial, federal, and civic government. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is asking our Prime Minister this very question. Why all the consultants?
He's spending 70% more on high-priced consultants. That adds up to $7 billion. The total budget for high-priced consultants today, $17 billion. That works out to more than $1,000 for every family in Canada. Think about that for a second. Your family is spending $1,000 in federal taxes for Justin Trudeau's high-priced consultants. That's an abject waste of money.
And as I said, provincially and federally, we've always had consultants, and it's always been part of the fabric of governance. However, in BC right now, they've kind of ratcheted up the tone of the thing. The premier seems to be gathering a lot of big names, very big names, that answer directly to the premier's office. It's almost like a cabinet situation with a U.S. president. And, well, here's a few of those heavy hitters. It looks like Premier David Eby feels he needs help on a number of ministry files, so look where he's turned. For example, Joy McPhail, the former NDP leader, who was chair of ICBC, has now taken over the chair position with BC Ferries. Another former leader, Carol James, is the chair at Royal BC Museum, where things have become rather bumpy. And we also have former Premier Glenn Clark. Now, Glenn Clark has just recently left Jimmy Pattison Group after 22 years, and it looks like he's heading to BC Housing. And then on the end of this list, we have another name, Penny Ballum. And Penny Ballum is not a politician. She's been very comfortable working on both sides of the aisle in the legislature, both the NDP and the Liberals. And she also worked for a time at City Hall in Vancouver as the city manager. That's where I worked with her. And I'll tell you, she is a real go-getter. She is tough. She is super hardworking. She takes no prisoners, and they've moved her in as a special advisor on the health file. And so the question I have about all this isn't that I have anything against any of these people. They are all very capable. But why this high level of consultants? What does this say? What does this say about the government's current roster of ministers and that talent pool? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, Robin, we've had quite a big bit of news recently land in the Rumble Room. Big civic news. It's transferred to now provincial. Lisa Helps, ex-mayor Lisa Helps, has been named a special advisor on housing by Premier David Eby. And we wanted to get some reaction from civic commentator Janice Williams on this issue. Janice ran for council, Victoria Council last year, knows a lot of these players, knows what's going on regionally. So let's zoom her in. Janice, great to see you. You know,
Great
last time
we
chatted was before the election.
Yes, the last time we spoke was before the election. I think we were right in the middle of it.
Quickly, you're still very active.
Yes.
And so we really want to get some opinions from you about stuff that's going on municipally in the region. And is there ever so much? Okay, so let's start with what I think is an obvious question, Janice. Is our former Victoria mayor the right person to guide policy on BC housing?
Wow, that's a really big question. And you know, people get into positions for a variety of reasons. Whether they're the right people or not, often you don't know until they've done their job. And I kind of feel like we won't really know if Lisa Helps was the right person or not until 6 months have lapsed and we begin to see the results of her input in this role. I think a lot of people are really hesitant. You look at Victoria and the track record over the last 8 years, and there's a lot of reason to be doubtful as to how this might work at the provincial level. But there's also some reason for optimism, in the sense that sometimes people learn from their mistakes, and sometimes they are able to be open-minded about, okay, what should have been done differently. And so my fingers are crossed, because I always want to see good policy. End of the day, I don't want things to get worse. And where we're at with housing in this province right now, if it got worse, we're in a crisis. What's going to happen if it goes up yet another notch? If it can get worse, given how bad it is, what does that look like?
Yeah. Okay. That's That's a great answer, Janice. Thank you. So, therefore, do you think BC will have more affordable housing? Actually, you might have answered this already. With Lisa Helps guiding the process.
If what has happened in Victoria over the last 8 years repeats itself province-wide, and the trend has been less affordable housing, not more. And even with missing middle, I think a lot of the concern with that was actually around displacement and people that are currently in affordable rentals seeing their current homes be demolished to make way for new townhouses, and then having to find something else is just next to impossible. Overall, if we shift things and really take a results focus on this problem and look at the data and kind of focus on, okay, are things getting more affordable or less affordable? We might make progress. Eby dropped a really big policy bomb right in the middle of the municipal election. If you remember, I think it was September 28th. He came out with his housing policy, and I think part of it was we're going to allow basically 3 units on every single family lot. And part of that impact of that was, I think at the municipal level, many voters then felt, okay, missing middle is no longer in play because the province has taken the horns on this. Mm-hmm. And I think we're kind of surprised to see it come back to the table and now passed.
But John, on that happy note, let's shift over again and let's talk for a few minutes about Ukraine.
Yeah, that was some great questions about consultancy. That's something I'm going to look forward to investigating and chatting about down the road. However, we've got tragedy, absolute tragedy on the other side of the world. It's been tough. It's very tough for me, for everyone, I suspect, to see this grinding battle of attrition in Ukraine. It's still the middle of winter, and neither side is gaining much ground. Ukraine is asking for more tanks and equipment all the time. UK is stepping forward. The United States is sounding hopeful. Germany is dragging its feet. I don't get it. Perhaps they don't want to see the war with Russia escalate. What do you think's happening right now? Oh boy. Anyway, lots of questions. So what's the latest? Who can we ask about what is actually going on? Well, we happen to have a favorite at the Rumble Room, and that is retired Lieutenant Colonel Chris Kilford, president of the Canadian International Council. Let's zoom him in. Hey, now joining us once again in the new year in the Victoria Rumble Room is our old friend, not old technically, but our many interviewed friend, Chris Kilford. Chris.
He just feels older after he does these shows.
That's right.
It's always fun.
Chris, once a senior military officer and attaché, now a very effective observer of the war in Ukraine for us. Chris, the cold weather has arrived. The ground is solid and freezing. Doesn't seem to be a lot of movement over there, at least from our perspectives. Just a grinding battle, which is costing lots of lives. Did you anticipate this, Chris? Is this what was supposed to happen?
Yeah, I think so. We're seeing, as you say, grinding battles over small villages and small towns, sometimes just a kilometer by kilometer in terms of size, and yet hundreds of people are dying and being injured in the fighting over small slices of territory. And it's become a slogging match, partly because of the weather, partly, I think, because both sides are exhausted. This has been going on for almost a year, and you will find that you begin to run out of momentum. You know, you need to regroup, take a breather, replenish, and so forth. And I think in the coming months, once the weather improves, the initiative will go to whatever side was better able to rest, replenish, and reorient during this current period. But that's not to say that the fighting doesn't continue.
Chris, great to have you on the show. As a former artillery officer, you have off and on talked a lot about that aspect of the war and the importance of having modern artillery. Is it HIMARS, I believe, that they're using so effectively with the Ukrainian side. And now I'm sure you've watched with interest, as we all have, the Prime Minister and Defense Minister announcing that Canada is going to be sending anti-ballistic missile systems that are going to be coming from Canada to the Ukraine. And my understanding is that the Canadian artillery forces here wouldn't have minded having this same system.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have liked to have had that system. As you say, I'm an artillery officer. I was in the field artillery for many years, but then in the air defense artillery. And I commanded our one and only air defense regiment from 1999 to 2001, which sounds a million years ago now. But we had at that time, I think, the best low-level air defense equipment in the world. But because of changing circumstances, the Taliban, for example, didn't have an air force, and the Islamic State didn't have an air force, and so the desire to keep air defense, its affordability, it went by the wayside. By 2012, we were out of the business of anti-aircraft defense, and now, of course, we see a great interest in resurrecting this capability because of the proliferation of drones and cruise missiles and so forth. So I think in the end, the Canadian Forces will acquire a new capability. But in the meantime, the priority is to acquire a system, NASAMS, and send it to Ukraine for their use against the drones, against helicopters and fighters, and to a degree against missile systems and so forth. But I think in this case, without declaring war against Russia, we are essentially at war with Russia. And so the priority goes to equipping the Ukrainians as best we can and training them as well, which we're doing. So I think it was a terrific decision for the Canadian government to take.
Chris, there's such a war of words, propaganda on the internet going on. It's a battle. Hard to know what's actually going on, what's really going on. We see the Russians pounding civilian targets, something that just, frankly, just makes me ill. I don't get that. Just recently, a huge explosion killed dozens of people in Dnipro. Do you think these missile attacks are build up to a new offensive? Have the Russians just run out of ideas? What is going on with this strategy of theirs?
Yeah, well, when you say the Russians have run out of ideas, and I've said this before, and you can see it. You can see it because they keep changing commanders at the front lines, and that's never a good thing because it's so disruptive. A commander comes in, he gets briefed up. He then puts in place a plan that he thinks will work. It doesn't work, and then he's dismissed, and somebody new comes in. So it creates turmoil at the head of the military there, and it creates turmoil throughout the ranks when they see this is happening. So that is very indicative of the Russians running out of ideas, and so you often get into a situation where you just start doing the same old things over and over again, expecting a different outcome. And that is never a good solution for a military to get into. It reminds you of the First World War, where when they had run out of ideas, it was just sending waves of men time and time again, knowing full well that it wasn't going to succeed, but it looked like you were doing something. So this is key to the Russian side. You mentioned propaganda, everything that's available on the internet. You have to really read behind the lines. It's obviously, we always look at whatever comes out of Moscow as being false or fake or whatever you wish to call it. But obviously the Ukrainians have a vested interest in making sure that their story is told as well. And so you get all this sort of information floating around, and you're trying to pick through what is true and what isn't true. And I always come down to basics. when I get into this situation. What do we actually know? We know that Russia invaded Ukraine. And that's a fact. And we know that they're on Ukrainian soil. That's a fact. We know that they're killing as many Ukrainians or disrupting the lives of Ukrainians as much as they can on a day-to-day basis. And that's a fact. So this is the reality of the war. All the rest is noise. And we know from our own side that we're supplying the Ukrainians and training them as much as we can. That's a fact. But these, so many killed, so many injured. We're here, we're there. It's sometimes very hard to say for sure what's happening on a day-to-day basis. But whenever I get into that situation, I just fall back on. At the end of the day, this is about one country invading another. There was no need to do it, and the death and destruction that comes with it it will create a situation where Russia is a pariah state, and I don't know how they come back from this.
It certainly is a big PR explosion, and a lot of world leaders take advantage of it. I mean, it was a PR benefit, I think, for Joe Biden to bring Zelensky out to Washington, D.C. and parade him around. He did well in those midterms, and I think in part because it was seen that he was being a strong war leader. And it's very interesting how NATO countries seem divided on their support right now for Ukraine. Canada, as you say, is getting very proactive. Great Britain has certainly taken a leadership role. Now, they're not part of the EU anymore, but they're still a big part of NATO. They're sending helicopters. They're going to send tanks. And it seems to me that the guys dragging their feet are the people that probably are the best equipped to be the biggest help right now in Ukraine. I'm thinking of the Germans. They have contracts out on tanks that other countries like Poland are using. Poland says they'd love to be able to send their tanks to Ukraine. The Germans are hesitant. What's the deal with the German attitude?
Well, I think it goes back a long time. It's a very, Germany always feels that it's in a very sensitive position when it comes to dealing with war fighting in general. Very much like Japan, also from their experiences in the Second World War. So they tend to be a little reluctant to get involved in these conflicts. It's new territory for them. But I think it's been swinging slowly but surely in the favor of Ukraine when it comes to the supply of advanced weapons. When we spoke months ago, I'd said or referred to a tipping point when we realized that Ukraine was capable of hanging on and fighting back and could actually succeed on a certain level in keeping the Russians at bay. And at that point, Western countries started to come in behind them. Now, initially, we were concerned about what kind of support we give, because it does come back to the fact that you haven't declared war on Russia, but really you have, because you're now supplying more and more advanced systems to the Ukrainians. Now, yes, you mentioned the British providing at least 12 or 14 or so Challenger main battle tanks, artillery systems. They're providing the Starstreak shoulder-launched air defense system. I mean, it's a long list of equipment that the UK is providing right now on top of what they already have. The Poles want to move Leopard tanks into Ukraine once they get the go ahead from the Germans. The German defense minister has just resigned. There's a lot of maneuvering going on as countries are beginning to really start sending their top line equipment. Yes, HIMARS, you mentioned, the surface-to-surface missile systems, very effective, top of the line. That's one example. Patriot, another example. Now we're talking Leopard and Challenger battle tanks, and maybe the Abrams tanks from the United States. So this is all going to percolate and come to the surface over the next couple of months. And I would say because it takes time to train people on all of these systems, but as we move into the summer, things being as they are, you've got one side, which are the Ukrainians, receiving the best training we can provide, the best equipment we can provide, and the Russians on the other side not being in that position. And so one would think that the initiative will continue to stay with Ukraine in the coming months.
So, Chris, the proverbial they
Hmm.
estimates that the Russians have lost upwards of 20,000 men since Christmas, well over 100,000 since this special operation began.
Yeah.
So, do you think people in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and generally speaking in Russia, are growing weary of all this? Do they still believe the Russian TV pundit spin? I guess they don't get anything else but that.
Yeah, so you get into situations where the fighting that we're seeing takes place in a very small area geographically. If you're in Moscow or somewhere else, St. Petersburg or out into far regions, it's a million miles away. Now, of course, you're suffering. You're seeing people being killed. They're coming back in body bags. It's affected many communities. They realize that something serious is going on, but they're a million miles away. Life goes on. Again, it just points to how Russian society, in many respects, has fallen to such awful levels that this can be done and seem to be normal. That's, I think, what we take away from this. And when we see the Wagner Group boasting in their videos of the things that they have done, again, it points to how far Russian society in general, and I'm going to paint the large picture when I talk about Russian society. I'm not going to allow anybody to escape from this blanketing, how far Russian society has fallen when this is seen to be acceptable. I know that there are Russians that would be appalled by what they're seeing, but where is that upswell or that self-reflection in Russian society on a grand scale where people start to say, who are we as a people? What are we doing?
Always great to hear from Chris Kilford and get his perspective on Ukraine. I'd love to see this conflict end soon. I see the U.S. government's now talking about hoping for some sort of a settlement, an agreed settlement. I don't see that happening, but who knows? But let's all pray for some peace in 2023 and cross our fingers. And we did mention earlier that we had Jim Stockbridge, a U.S. commentator, on talking about the comparison of some of the issues in Canada and the United States, Trumpism, how that is sort of reflected a little bit by our truckers movement in terms of the language and the flag waving. And sure enough, we've got some reaction to that as well. And Jim Stockbridge himself got some feedback.
Yes.
He got some feedback from an American viewer, and we thought we'd have to feed that or share that now, just so that you have an idea of perspective and to show the wide reach of Victoria Rumble Room. Tom commented, "Jim, what were you thinking? Speaking with such honesty and truth. When you and your wife head for Canada, take me. I can't cook, but I'm pretty good at laundry."
Great comments.
So on that happy note, John, it's time to wrap up the Rumble Room, and perhaps you could again tell our many beloved viewers how they can tune in and watch our show on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great show, Robin. And I think that what I'm enjoying is I'm actually becoming very physically involved with the show. It's almost like having a little workout. I love it. And so therefore can't wait till next week when we speak about missing middle housing with Casey Edge. See, too much excitement from this end. And we talk about that issue with Casey Edge from the Victoria Home Builders Association. Promises to be a very lively discussion. Big topic, Lower Vancouver Island and BC and the world. If you are enjoying our program, and I think we have a few of those people, here's how you can follow the Victoria Rumble Room and see our past shows and see our clips. So obviously our home base is Facebook. We have an active Twitter account. We have our YouTube back. Please come and visit all of our shows. We're very active on various groups on Facebook, and we have a Instagram and TikTok account, which continue to provide exciting commentary and sometimes, debatable commentary. So for now, Robin and all of our listeners who are at this moment all getting vaccinated. I remain your Croatian sensation, Johnny Juricic.
Oh, John, I feel like I should be waving my hands more as I say, I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.